Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCast, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
This week I've been kind of pondering the whole concept of circular economies. And so I've got some notes here that I could read from. So let's see. So I spoke in the past about this guy named Daniel Schmachtenberger. He's a co-founder at the Neurohacker Collective and a director of research and development, where he is focused on developing processes and technologies for advancing medicine and human optimization. And I find him to be just a really fascinating guy to listen to. He did a video interview a while back with Rebel Wisdom, and he talks about the metamorphosis of the all-consuming caterpillar. And he compares that with the massive shift that we're entering in humanity. So when the biological clock ticks for a caterpillar, it begins to eat everything in sight. It doesn't know why, it's just programmed to do it. All of a sudden something clicks in and it goes through an insane period of rabid consumption. This is part of the process that is required for it to crawl into its cocoon and turn into a puddle of goop and reform its cells into a totally different creature, a one with wings. It's amazing. It's one of nature's miracles. And so he suggests that perhaps humanity is doing something similar. Perhaps we're just now moving out of the rabid consumption phase and are about to develop a form of planetary self-awareness, where we learn that we are part of the planet and we must find balance within it rather than something we consume and discard. So I remember being a kid in 5th or 6th grade, roughly the age of my daughter right now, and learning that the population of our planet was about 3.5 billion. And I recall being told that the planet was on course to double in my lifetime. And I was quite affected by this thought at that impressionable age. It was one of the early moments when I confronted the realization of our planet's finite resources. And here we are in 2019, and it's come true. The planet has actually just now doubled in my lifetime. We're now at 7 billion. So here's the interesting thing. We're actually now in decline. The growth rate peaked in the late 60s. Since I was 10 years old, the world's population has doubled, but now it'll take 200 years based on current projections for the population to double again. So perhaps we've done the caterpillar thing. We've done our collecting of resources. We've done our kind of rabid consumption, unprecedented in human history, massive hockey stick of consumption that has happened in my lifetime. But yet we're not quite self-aware yet. The take, make, dispose model of linear economics has done its job spectacularly of allowing us to be the rabid caterpillar eating everything in sight without us knowing why. But we're moving to a new era now. And Daniel Schmachtenberger calls it a phase shift. Certainly a radical shift is underway with the fourth industrial revolution we're entering. What Ian was just talking about, right? Like, 5G networks, the internet is going to be transformed in the next 5 to 10 years, just with that alone. A few weeks ago, I was talking about Thomas Stalker, the climate scientist who describes the fourth industrial revolution as the era of decarbonization. the last three industrial revolutions were about incredible exponential growth. This one is no longer about such rapid growth. This one is about seeing our position on this planet as part of a circular ecosystem. So I look up circular economy on Wikipedia. So here's a quote from Wikipedia. A circular economy, often referred to as simply as circularity, is an economic system aimed at eliminating waste and the continual use of resources. This regenerative approach is in contrast to the traditional linear economy, which has a take, make, dispose model of production, close quote. So what forward-thinking businesses are starting to realize is that the old 20th century model of thought, where resources are imagined to be infinite and capable of being plundered forever, has shown itself to be an outdated idea. We're now witnessing the finite nature of our planet, and now have the opportunity to shift our thinking towards economic prosperity within a circle. So continuing from Wikipedia, quote, proponents of the circular economy suggest that a sustainable world does not mean a drop in the quality of life for consumers and can be achieved without loss of revenue or extra costs for manufacturers. The argument is that circular business models can be as profitable as linear models, allowing us to keep enjoying similar products and services, close quote. So this approach of including what were considered negative externalities in a business model into the complete circle of a company's impact on the environment is not only working towards a solution for a sustainable and regenerative planet, it's also good for business. We are seeing forward-thinking companies taking this approach right now. For example, I just read this week about the Swedish clothing company, H&M, and their plans on shifting to a circular economic model, where the company retains ownership of the garment from its inception to the end of its life cycle. You'd be renting the garment, and when you no longer had a use for it, you'd return it, and H&M would reuse the material to make new garments. So they're keeping control of the full life cycle. So for this to actually work to its fullest, you would need some type of system that has complete life cycle provenance of that garment. So in the fourth industrial revolution, two key technologies will be the Internet of Things and 5G internet. Virtually every object could have internet connectivity. We're already seeing that with that Tiles product, you know, that Tiles thing. You can buy these little tiles that you can stick on any object and you never lose it. So we could have tiny chips that could be woven into fabric and connected to a blockchain that would record its life cycle. And once returned back to H&M, a credit could be created and directly deposited into your crypto account. So this would require a truly scalable concurrent blockchain like our chain. Ideally, you would want to do this without the surveillance capitalism baggage. And this could be done with a blockchain solution that has privacy and individual data ownership built into its architecture. It's easy to expand this thought into any physical product and envision a world where a truly circular, full life cycle supply chain is possible. And so there's so many entities out there working on circular solutions right now. It's quite amazing to just do a quick Google search. One example is Bext 360. Which, quote, Bext 360 provides comprehensive and measurable accountability for critical supply chains. The SaaS platform provides unsurpassed blockchain traceability and quantifiable measurements for sustainability. Bext 360 focuses on supply chains such as coffee, seafood, timber, minerals, cotton, and palm oil to provide a traceable fingerprint from producer to consumer, close quote. Another random example is circleeconomy.com. Quote, a social enterprise organized as a cooperative, Circle Economy accelerates the transition to circularity through on-the-ground, action-focused development of practical and scalable solutions, close quote. So we're starting to see this. We're starting to see a global phase shift with scores of entities proposing blockchain solutions to the burgeoning circular economy movement. So yeah, I guess I'll just stop there and see if I've bored everybody.
Well, I think this is why I wanted you to start this this week's talk off with this, because I think it's such a fascinating thing. I think two specific things really come to mind. First thing is that I could see how like people might cut off like these little tags in their clothes, you know, and maybe try to avoid turning them back into H&M, and then maybe sell them themselves on like the black circular economics market, and, you know, try to sell them, you know, to each other or whatever, and just reuse. And of course that would be really good for the planet, because secondhand clothing is really the future, because the fashion industry is so incredibly wasteful. But the other thing is that even though the growth rate of population has slowed, obviously the population is still growing. And so even though it will take longer for the population to double once again, I still do think, and many people talk about this, it's still an obstacle to reaching carbon neutralization, that we will be adding hundreds of millions and billions of more people to the planet. Obviously, it's not as much of a space issue, because obviously there are huge swaths of land that are just completely empty around the earth, but it is obviously a resources issue, because we're already starting to run out of water in many places. So those two things really came to mind. But also I just think I'm so glad that you read the part on the Wikipedia page about how circular economics is not a way to lose money. It's not a way to hinder how businesses work and the quality of life for people. Because a lot of people think that in order to be environmentally sustainable, basically, like even just that word sustainable usually has a connotation of being a lower experience level, or a less productive economic situation. And I think that we need to work on that association with people, because it's going to be very soon that if we don't get a handle on what's going on, you know, if we burn up the planet, just try running a business with no water, see how sustainable and profitable that is. Anyway, so I think this is a really great subject to start off with. If anybody else has any comments about this, and of course, connecting it back to the blockchain is super relevant as well. So, yay!
So I wanted to mention a few things. First of all, I think it's really it's quite striking that you would bring this topic up today. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Last night I was finishing off the prospectus finally. The first half, by the way, has already been translated into Chinese, and there's a lot of support for the document. But in the section on tokens, which is part of a larger section on how people can engage, I talk specifically about how if our chain achieves critical mass and gets a vibrant network of dApps, then what we're talking about is a token that is necessary for all of the dApp activity in the entire ecosystem. So that resource is like oxygen or water for that ecosystem. And what I mentioned in the prospectus is that our chain wants to engage with people who see this as a kind of virtualization of what we're facing, and sees it as a laboratory for how to engage and manage precious resources. Right? So every piece of the R-chain architecture has a value in and of itself, and is about starting to learn from these biological models how we can scale as a species, how we can transform into a being that has wings. So I thought it was really remarkable that you're talking about this And that's what I was writing about last night. But I want to make sure that people understand what I'm saying. If we have a tokenized essentially it's a defense against denial of service, but it also becomes this kind of precious resource that everyone needs in order to keep the economy, the vibrant DApp service layer going, which means that as a collective, we have to manage that resource so that it stays in flow. If it gets hoarded, the DApps shut down, right? Just like if you hoard all the water on the planet, life shuts down. So it becomes this opportunity to learn by doing a different model. And once we learn that, then we can transfer that understanding to something that's a little bit more risky, i.e. global resources. Does this make sense to, yeah, does it make sense?
Yes.
Makes a lot of sense to me, Greg. It's like the thing that I kind of keep getting from Daniel Schmachtenberger that I really resonate with is that we're on the cusp of a massive phase shift of humanity. This is like any other era in humanity. It's going to pale in comparison to what's about to happen, and so it happens across every sector of humanity's existence.
Yes, I agree. I was recently talking with a friend, and we share a common language in the sense that we both have a sense of what it means to engage the present moment and to talk about sort of nested present moments. So present moments where, for example, there's the present moment of this conversation, which lasts 1 hour, and then there's the present moment of one's day. And inside it is the present moment of this conversation. And, there's a present moment of a year, a 7-year cycle, or a lifetime. And humanity also has a present moment in the sense that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But the interesting thing about present moments is that we never know exactly how they're going to unfold. Like seeds, exactly how the organism unfolds is always a mystery. And so it doesn't have to be that this phase shift is a phase shift towards our end. But we do need to contemplate that and remain fully alert to the possibility that this phase shift is a phase shift towards humanity's end. And hopefully that provides a certain kind of energy that makes it possible for it to be, a different kind of unfolding, a transformational unfolding to a new level of capacity. Yeah, I don't know if that made sense, but that's the way I think about it. Let me just check in and see how people respond to that.
Yeah, I think that being aware of the potential downside is really always important, but it's also important to never be overcome by fear.
Yeah.
As Peter Gabriel said, fear is the mother of violence.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, well, this has been awesome. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, if it's possible to move on, Daryl, if you feel like we've covered that sufficiently.
Oh yeah, please.
Okay, awesome. I wanted to I'm putting a link to this article from New York Magazine in the chat that I found this past week, which basically discusses the unfortunate, I don't usually like to say the word failure, but unfortunately, I think maybe in this case, we can use the word failure in order to learn from this example and move forward. The failure of the COP25 conference and talks in Madrid. that have just ended. If anybody wasn't aware, there were a series of conferences and talks, this international summit that happened recently in Madrid, and this very poignant author called David Wallace Wells wrote this piece, which is now in the chat if anybody wants to look at it. And basically he talks about how the talks have basically completely broken down, and how we really need to figure out a way to move forward in a productive manner, because basically if we continue to rely on these talks to get us out of this mess, it's not really going to work. Unfortunately, because all we see is corporations and leaders doing these basically kind of lip service agreements, and they're really doing these smaller cuts. They're not really willing to face anything kind of major. And there are some smaller countries that have stepped up, but unfortunately, we're not really seeing the systemic changes that we're needing to see. And obviously, this talk comes on a string of sort of failed agreements and failed from before this. Got also that wanted to be enough, and that got shut down. And anyway, this author David Wallace Wells wrote this really fascinating piece. It's a bit long, so it'd be a bit difficult to summarize, but he's a really interesting author because he really he wrote this fantastic book called The Uninhabitable Earth, and he really talks about the failing of, not in this piece, but in other pieces, he's talked about the failing of the media to really talk about the seriousness of the climate crisis, and how they're really afraid oftentimes to scare people adequately with the correct information, and how they really only talk about the climate movement like during a disaster, but there's so much to talk about all the time. And he basically said that he wrote his book, The Uninhabitable Earth, because basically he was just so alarmed from finally reading these IPCC reports, and he doesn't feel like it's the media's job to kind of keep people in the dark about what is going on. He really feels like it's time for the media to really start openly talking about what is heading our way, because people need to really be prepared. And anyway, it's just a shame that these talks have kind of failed. But again, I don't mean to say that in a negative way. I want to say, we can learn from failure and really understand what we can do differently next time. So obviously, the power is with the people. So this is a very unfortunate event because it took so much resources to bring all these people together. And it's just sad that they're part very small, but anyway, I just wanted to share this article with everybody and just comment that the world puts its faith in these conferences, and then sometimes they really do not go the way that we desperately need now that COP25 finished.
Yeah, well, I think that the failure of COP25 right now is just kind of an indicator, almost like Greg was saying, like these moments in time. it's like this indicator now that we're kind of going through a little down dark blip. The biggest emitter in the world has a president who calls climate change a Chinese hoax. I've never understood that one. But it's crazy, right? So we're living in kind of a crazy moment, and I think that one thing that article talks about is the Green New Deal, and I think that well, first of all, okay, so the idea of a bunch of nations getting together to do something, a lot of people ridicule that idea. A lot of people, some conspiracy theorists call it, an attempt at a one world government, or, but to me, I think it's actually vitally important. And I think that the United Nations, with all of its flaws, is a bright shining light in an example of humanity's waking up to itself, of starting that first glimmer of becoming globally self-aware as a species. And the first time I kind of experienced that kind of excitement around the idea of the United Nations was actually at a Amnesty International concert, where it was like, let's see, it was Peter Gabriel, Sting, Bruce Springsteen, Tracy Chapman, Youssou N'Dour. I think that was all the artists. I might have missed one or two. When you walked into the venue, you received a little copy of the Declaration of Human Rights.
Wow.
And it was cool because I'd never read it before, and it's a beautiful document. And so what was the United Nations? The United Nations was this thing that was formed out of a time of crisis. We wanted to never have another world war. And the world got together and said, we're not going to have another world war. And we formed this body. And I think it still serves a strong purpose. And I think, I believe in the UN. I believe in the idea of it. And I believe in the idea of the planet, the nations of the planet getting together to discuss climate change and global warming. And I think that it's going to continue to be a very important function in our planetary awakening. So this is just a down period. It's going to get better. But what has to happen now, because this particular approach is failing currently, we have to step up. And I think we will. And that means, like the focus I've been kind of more focused on now is looking for solutions that come from the private sector, from companies and businesses and cities. Cities are really kind of taking over and leading the charge, where nations are kind of failing right now. And that's exciting. We're seeing some cities kind of, using zero carbon zones as an experiment. There's a city in England that just announced that this week, that they're building what is it? Brixton? What is it? Does anybody know?
Bristol.
Brighton? Bristol. Is it Bristol? Where they're literally
I think so.
Pledging to be a zero carbon zone.
Brixton is a neighborhood in London, I think.
Okay, yeah.
But Bristol might be it. I need to look it up, but that sounds familiar.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that I applaud the efforts. I think it's going to get better. We're just in this period of insanity right now.
Yeah. Well, not completely. I agree with everything you just said. What a cool concert to go to. And two things came to mind. First, the Chinese hoax idea, which is insane. Just so you know, his idea the president's idea about that, because the minds of humans, so that we will basically thwart U.S. Like products, like oil and other, what am I trying to say? Exports and things like that. Like the whole idea is that we're trying to say, like, it's their idea for us to trash our own products and say, oh, like, we're not going to export anything anymore, and like we're not going to make anything anymore because it's all dirty and it's all bad. So I didn't say it very well, but that's the whole idea behind that, to hurt US companies. Okay, so that's insane. Second thing is that, Bernie Sanders last night, who has the strongest climate plan of all the candidates, love him or hate him, he has the strongest one, said last night on the debate stage, he was asked about the Paris Climate Agreement, and or I guess that's where the discussion went. I don't know if he was directly asked about it, but anyway, he basically said, like, look, that's great that you want to stay in the Paris Climate Agreement, but like we're trying to make sure that like the planet is habitable for our children. So like that's not going to be enough, like the Paris Agreement is not going to get us there. And I just, I think that's the kind of, vision that we need, not to say that we need to elect Bernie Sanders, because that's, that's not for me to decide. That's for everybody to make their own decision about that. But my point is that these agreements that we make are not going far enough. And you don't often hear leaders, whether they're in office, whether they're in leaders of corporations, whatever type of leaders they are, they don't usually say things like that. Like, okay, Paris Agreement, great, let's do it. But like, there's so much more that's not going to save the planet for our grandchildren. And that's true. It's not going to, because it doesn't go nearly far enough. And I thought that was a very inspirational moment last night, because while there are other people clinging to these agreements, thinking they're going to solve all of our problems, it doesn't even begin to cover it. So that's, I guess, the essence of the piece that I put in the chat, is that these summits are not going to, they're just not going to do it. So anyway, I have a piece that's coming out on the RChain blog very soon about all of this, and hopefully it's going to be good. Oh, I hope it's going to be good. I hope people are going to like it. But yeah, we have a lot of work to do.
So I think we should see if we can get David Wallace Wells and Daniel Schmachtenberg onto the call. I think
I
having them.
completely agree.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So let's take some steps to figure out how we get that done.
Yeah, that would be fun and productive.
For sure. I'm gonna take the mantle on Daniel Schmachtenberger. I've been wanting to meet him for a while now, so that'd be great. I would love to.
Yeah. Ian, Ned, Christian, any thoughts on any of this? Or perhaps not. That's fine as well.
I wouldn't mind continuing to talk about what Ian brought up at the beginning of the call.
Oh yeah, that was really fascinating as well. Yeah, Ian, where did you find that?
I'll look around for it. It was a news article that came up in one of my feeds I was following for applications of blockchain. I thought it would be a good match for RChain, because that's an application that would have many transactions per second. That would be huge. I mean, what would be one of the most challenging applications for and needed applications for blockchain? So telecommunications, big one. So that would be smart contracts to govern roaming relationships between cell phone carriers.
And so what these smart contracts would have to be executed at every single connection? How would it?
Well, I think whenever a customer goes into roaming, that would create a smart contract.
Okay.
So I know RChain has a couple folks with good telco experience. I think they could understand a little bit better how that would have to be implemented. But we're definitely looking for challenging real world applications that can show off the potential of the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're only going to be adding more devices as time goes on. I read something about how there's also with what is it called when there's no typing? Is it voice activated, or what is it called? Oh my god, I can't think of the name.
Transcription?
No, but anyway, when it's just anyway, they're going to be like 2 billion apparently devices that are just running on voice, as in they don't have keyboards, like speakers that you put voice commands into, but they're connected to your phone.
You're talking about IoT devices that respond to voice?
I guess it's IoT, yeah. But like maybe sometimes people call them like voice command or like voice, like whatever. But
yeah,
but
they're
yeah,
building that
IoT,
stuff into light bulbs now. So you've got Alexa, you've got Google Home.
Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah,
But yeah,
like
apparently there's going to be 2 billion of those in the next couple of years and growing. So that's like a whole other class of devices that we didn't have before. So that's crazy.
Yeah, and to me, like that just conjures up some scary stuff about surveillance societies, and what role surveillance is going to play in all of this. And
oh yeah, that Amazon doorbell is going to be the least of our problems.
yeah, I mean everything will have some kind of a mic and camera on it. And to me, like that's a problem that has to be solved. The whole concept of surveillance capitalism is to me like one of the greatest problems we have to fix, and we have to fix it quickly, or it will get out of our control.
I think, I also worry about these whole life cycle approaches because they do lead to a lot of surveillance capitalism ideation. And it's not how it happens in nature, right? So the seed is not looked over and managed by the tree,
right?
But I do think that there's an important distinction or shift in mindset that has to do with ownership versus stewardship, and I think that shows up very much when we talk about land, our relationship to the land. People talk about themselves being homeowners, but the truth is they're not really the owners of the home by any stretch of the imagination, especially when we talk about a built environment like in Europe, which is built to last hundreds, if not thousands of years. Nobody lives that long, and so they are clearly not the owners of that land in any sort of common understanding. They're a steward of the land, and the notion of stewardship comes with responsibility. You want to leave the thing better than you found it. It's not for your personal consumption. It's you're there in a role of responsibility to give it to the next generation, right? And this idea of stewardship, of course, it extends to the planet, right? And if we're gifted with with a capacity that makes it possible for us to destroy the planet, then that capacity can be turned to a kind of stewardship, so that we can leave the place better than we found it, for the next generation. And I think that kind of mindset has to happen. That shift goes along with the other kind of transformations that you were talking about, Daryl. I really don't believe in cradle to grave ownership, but I could imagine a partnership where right where people say, look, I don't want to I would like to enlist the help of a company that's manufactured something as a part of my overall stewardship of this manufactured thing. But is a very different mindset than renting, because as soon as we go down that model, then there's a whole bunch of surveillance capitalism stuff that comes along with it.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying. It's funny that, you know, Nora's first reaction was like how people are going to hack into it. You know, like I love that, right? It's probably what would happen, right?
And it's decidedly what will happen. Yes.
And so the idea of a company owning the product from start to finish shifts into the idea of yes, we're keeping track of that product, but it's not necessarily for the purpose of maintaining ownership for a company.
Yeah, or even you know, like the idea of keeping track of it. It's more like, you know, you could imagine a partnership, so that like cellular roaming, it's not always the same party that's keeping track of it, right? It's that as a collective, we realize that for certain resources, we need to have a better view, but that view is not owned by, the data associated with that view is not owned by any one private individual or private concern. Rather, the view is managed by the community, and then the way I think about ownership is engagement is 9/10 of ownership. And I learned this in Microsoft. You know, I would look at the way a code base, it's the life cycle of a particular code base. And you could see that, you know, product managers were claiming to own a code base, but in fact, it was those people who were engaged on a regular basis that had the most influence over the actual code, right? And that could be developers if the developers were more engaged. It could be project managers or program managers, but it was really about engagement. If somebody was checked out, they had no ownership over their code. And that's the way I think about these questions. I don't think ownership is exactly the right word. I think we need a new notion. I like stewardship, but it's still a little bit shy of the mark, at least in the way I experience it. So I think we need to have new words for these kinds of relationships.
Yeah. It's kind of like, the question isn't who owns it. The question becomes why own it.
Or I think it's, look, I'll be really blunt and honest. I think it's who loves it. Right? And engagement is really, at the end of the day, engagement is one of the most direct expressions of love. If you neglect something, you can say with every breath in your body that you love it, but you've neglected it, and that's the fact. If you love it, you're engaged.
It's kind of reminding me of, I can't remember now, just last week I watched a TED Talk or something where it was talking about payment, and they found that there's a point where employees are paid really well and their engagement level starts to drop.
Yes.
And it was a company, it's the company Atlassian. They have this policy on Fridays where it's basically do whatever you want day. And on that day, people are like doing crazy stuff, doing really positive things for the company. And it's like the idea is that people get stuff done when they're excited about what they're getting done. It's kind of why we sent our daughter to a Montessori school. You know,
that's one of the best things you could have done. Waldorf is also another one that's, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think this goes back, you know, to like I asked Nora, and by extension you, Daryl, what would it take to get this channel to high quality content, high production value? And the follow-up question is, can we do it within the decentralized mindset? Because if we have to become sort of content Nazis or production Nazis, we've lost sight of what we're trying to do. But if there's a way that the conversation can be fluid and open and follow things, follow, you know, the flow and the will, so to speak, then that's I think that's, you know, then we're walking the walk.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Maybe let's not use the word Nazi in that context, but I agree. And
are you being a Nazi?
Well, you know, I just want to be realistic here and respectful of everybody. So
fair enough.
But no, I agree. I have to admit, though, getting back to your original point, I did have a little bit of trouble wrapping my head around it because, you know, having some experience, you know, in this realm, making and being part of content, you know, on TV and on YouTube and all sorts of different things, as other people on this call also have experience with. I don't have a lot of experience with a decentralized environment in that realm.
Now I think you're understanding what everyone is struggling with, right? Like when I built the dev team, that's exactly what I was struggling with. I don't want to be in charge, right? And when people say that I'm weak or that, you know, I'm not a good leader or whatever, it's like, fine, I accept that. You know, I'm trying to build a completely different organization, an organization where people work because this excites them, because this is what they want to work on, and they love doing the work.
Yes.
You know,
I
you
do
know,
appreciate that, and
it's really hard.
Very important. It is really hard, and obviously, you know, I believe in that, but I do think it is going to be a little bit of a challenge to create something that is organized without organizing it.
Yes, right. That's exactly right. And those are the kind of, yeah.
It's a little bit of a, what's the word?
Tightrope walk.
That's 3 words, but that's good.
I hear you, Nori, but I don't think organization is synonymous with central control.
No, I agree. No, I totally agree with that. I'm just, because I don't think that it has to be top down. Like, I don't even think the best organizations or the best productions are like I don't think those things are always top down.
But one thing is that humans still naturally respond to leadership. It's just deeply ingrained in us, right?
Well, yeah.
For better, for worse, you know. I remember when my ex-girlfriend, she was taking media studies, and her first textbook was called Introduction to Communication Studies. And the first chapter was on the Shannon Weaver model. And there were 2 workers at Bell Labs, and they came up with a very simple principle, but I think it's a principle that could guide us in some ways. And that is that to communicate any idea, there has to be a certain level of redundancy and a certain level of entropy. And right now we're using the redundancy of a common language that we've all learned. And yet we're trying to float new ideas with each other that have never been, perhaps never quite thought of in the same way by our fellow other human that we're communicating with, and that's the entropy. So there still needs to be some redundancy in any type of an organizational system. So to me, like the challenge that Greg is talking about, there is a method to his madness. I think the challenge is like, where does the redundancy get inserted to, to allow for the most entropy to enter into the equation?
Yeah, so I want to be a little bit careful. Entropy means disorder. So
yeah, I know it's a term that they used.
Yeah. So Shannon was the inventor of one of the forms of information theory, and Weaver was his student.
Okay.
And basically, it is really instructive to look at Shannon's book on information theory. It's this slender little book. And then to compare that to Weaver's exegesis of that slender little book, which is many times its size.
Okay. I'm going to check this out.
Yeah. It's another instance of exactly this phenomenon is if you look at Milner's book on the pi calculus, it's this slender little book. And you look at his student, Davide Sangiorgi's book on the pi calculus, it's many times its size.
That's funny.
Well, it's, on the one hand, I think that there is a kind of impedance matching that has to happen, so when you're trying to disseminate an idea to a larger community, you have to expand it. But there's something about the economy of the master. When someone who is really, really deep into the work, and so that they are, they embody the work in a certain way, they have an economy of expression that is noticeable, right? And this is often reflected in Zen, stories of Zen masters and stories of masters of martial arts and things like that. There's a kind of flow and economy of expression, economy of being that is immediately recognizable. And this is one of the ways that it's recognizable. It's just like how tiny it is, how little it takes for Shannon to express his ideas about information theory, and how much they actually contain, right? When we unpack them.
Well, I'm definitely going to keep thinking about what you said about working on the audience for this call in a decentralized manner. I think it might take me a little bit of time to fully wrap my head around how to do it, but I'm going to work on that.
Cool. Yeah. I think there are some interesting principles. Like one of the things that we can take away from what happened with YouTube is that people really respond to authenticity, right? That authenticity has to be a part of the equation when we talk about high production value, right? People experienced a sense of ennui when we had only broadcast channels and not, sort of a YouTube-like model. And that's because there's a way in which high production value, if it's not done right, something leaks away in terms of life and authenticity. And what YouTube brought back in my experience is it brought back the immediacy, the sort of the thymus, the blood of authenticity, right? So and you could sense it. Like you go to a YouTube channel, and when there's someone who's genuinely passionate about what they do, then you sense it, and that's why they get viewership, right? Is because you can sense, the magic that is their passion for whatever it is they're making their channel about.
It's funny, while you're talking about that, I'm thinking about my daughter, who, her entire almost main source of media is YouTube. And one of her favorites is this woman who, she repairs squishies. She gets millions and millions of views. Like
Wow.
Millions.
Wow,
and
that's
all
crazy.
she does is repair squishies, and she's super passionate about it. Like, she's just so into it, and I must admit, I get caught up watching them with Vivian. It's just like,
that's amazing. Well, this is what I'm talking about. Is that people recognize when there's something really there, right?
Yeah.
And that's something really there is really what we mean by, high content, high production value, right? So
what was that?
That is my dog chewing on her squishy, which has a squeak inside it.
Awesome.
Yes. Fibers is embodying squishy destruction.